Hello, everyone. This is Jenny Smith. I am the mentor for the Sisters PowerUp iOS project for GSoC 2018. I want to introduce my student, Cadence Holmes, who will be demoing her work on the PowerUp iOS project for this GSoC session.
Great, thanks. My name is Cadence. I have been working on the PowerUp iOS project for Sisters, and my proposal was called Out of Character Contextual Information for PowerUp. It evolved a little bit over the course of the project, and I'll describe that in a minute. Sorry, I'm not able to switch slides. There we go. I am a multimedia artist and a designer and programmer. My background is not in tech, it's in music. And I got into programming and technology when I started composing electronic music. I am a PhD candidate in experimental music and digital media at Louisiana State University. A professor of mine had mentioned Google Summer of Code to me, and I looked into it, and I thought it would be a really great chance to get some experience in technology and working with other programmers and on a team in a way that I don't normally get to do since I do most of my work on my own, or at least am responsible for my own code with no accountability or oversight. And when I was going through the projects, I came across Sisters, and I thought it was really interesting. I was looking for iOS or web-based projects. I saw PowerUp, and when I clicked on the Sisters mission statement on their website, it really spoke to me. It's their mission of being inclusive and of empowering women, and how PowerUp is meant to empower young women. It's something I really believe in. So I tried out their game and came up with a proposal. When I was trying out the game, I realized that there was a lot of potential for PowerUp to be impactful. I agreed with what they were trying to do, and I felt that I could try and help with the goal of PowerUp by increasing the immersiveness of the story. So I put in my application and was accepted, and I'll give you the details about that in a second. But the team that I was working with was, for the iOS side, was essentially just me and Jenny. I was responsible for the deliverables, and as outlined in my proposal and accepted by the mentors. And Jenny provided feedback and advice and did code reviews. And we also met with the Android PowerUp team on a weekly basis, and Maybelline, May, was our admin for the project. PowerUp is a choose-your-own-adventure style mobile game. And as I mentioned, it's meant to empower young women, and specifically, it focuses on some sort of difficult topics surrounding bodily and sexual health and safety. And this is where I was getting at a second ago. I felt that it would be really useful to users, and also to documenting the project as a whole, by increasing the immersiveness of the story, but also by being able to add in out of context information. That's where my proposal title came from. I was thinking of it as a way of being able to provide blips or blurbs of different sorts to give some context to the things you might be choosing, because some of the questions and answers in the scenarios, the way that they are intended to be, could be really, I mean, not dangerous, but could be really uncomfortable, or maybe not clear as to what is the proper solution. So in my proposal, I had proposed to add automated story sequences, which would be click-through animated sequences with text and characters that would augment the questions and answers in the scenarios that were already present, and also to have stylized pop-up notifications that could be used for any number of reasons anywhere throughout the app. I had originally intended to code first versions of these pop-ups and story sequences and include them in the app. But when I got more familiar with the PowerUp project and the state it was in, I realized that that wouldn't be an efficient use of my time. They had already accepted my proposal, and I was looking at ways of doing that. And then I suggested creating tools to help with actually designing and creating the data sets that we would need for the questions and answers and for the story sequences. And so that's where my proposal ended up. In the end, I did features in PowerUp iOS using Swift, and then I also created a Go.js web app for handling the scenario question and answers, and a Vue.js web app for handling creating story sequences to use with my new PowerUp features. The timeline was pretty basic. In phase one, I intended to finish all of the Swift classes, and originally I had wanted to use phase 2 and 3 for sourcing and writing and working all of the rest of the content into it. But after the changes, I ended up spending a portion of phase 1 also working on the Go.js web app we call the PowerUp Scenario Builder. Then in phase 2, I spent pretty much the whole month working on the Story Sequence Designer Vue.js web app. And in phase 3, I kind of tied it all together. I finished up loose ends, refactored a lot of code, and worked on maintenance optimizations, and also created public-facing documentation for users of the web apps, but also for future developers that might be working on the iOS classes. The links at the bottom, you can see my original timeline as well as the augmented and adjusted timeline that I worked on. And then the wiki link, it will have details week by week of the progress I made as I worked on my deliverables. The new power features that I added were the story sequences and the pop-ups, and a dependency for those ended up being a class I've called Animate. The story sequence player is it handles the entire life cycle of these story sequences. It will it's encapsulated and it doesn't require a lot to actually instantiate and launch one of these story sequences. The whole class is a subclass of UI view. I wanted to make it as simple to use and to be as unobtrusive as possible so that it wouldn't require any changes or any significant changes to existing code. I wanted this to be something that could be added on top of the existing structures without getting in the way. Similarly, a pop-up event player does the same thing but handles just the pop-ups. These can use a data set for linking pop-ups to specific answers in the question and answer scenarios, but it can also be used anywhere in the app just by providing the parameters for the text and the other optional things like the badge icon that you can see over here. Animate is a class that is meant to help with asynchronous animations. One of the problems I ran into when I was creating animations for the story sequence player was since they were entirely automated and needed to be timed, the simplest thing was to actually just create this class that provided callbacks wrapped around the UIView.animate methods already built into iOS. What I was going for was a way that you could simply embed these chainable commands. So it's a very readable syntax. See a small example here where you would say to do one thing, and then it would do that over a certain duration, and then it would do the next thing. So you could create a really complex list of commands and run them automatically just from a single trigger. And that helped with adding some polish to the animations in the story sequence player. In the end, this could also be used throughout the app, but it's right now it's only a dependency for story sequence player and pop-up event player. So now I'm going to show you what those look like in the app. You'll notice here in order to start a story sequence, all we need to do is locate a story sequence model. In this case, we're pulling it out of a data set containing all of the story sequence intro and outros for all the scenarios. And then we create a view with the model and delegate, some optional parameters, and then we add to the view hierarchy. That's it. And this will automatically launch the view, and the class itself handles all of the interactions and timing and all of its own views, and draws its variables from the data set that was provided in the model. So all we have to do in order to launch one is to go into a new scenario, and it's going to launch the intro. It does its first step, which will provide text and an image. The image will move to a designated location, and if there's an animation, it'll do it. Then we can tap to get the next step. And you can see a variety of different animations that I've added and how the images will move around. Another feature of it is that this expects that there'll be certain characters with different moods or types, different facial expressions, and the class handles switching out between them so that they can change as we go. Once we're done and got to the last step provided in our data set, it will dismiss itself and will automatically be removed from its superviews hierarchy, so it gets released. There are optional delegate methods, but they're optional. They're just there if you need to know when one has ended or not. The next thing are the pop-up events. They can, like I said, they can be used anywhere throughout the app, but they can also be triggered with answers. So an answer has a pop-up ID that links it to a specific pop-up in the pop-ups data set. So if I click, it'll play the pop-up. There is a badge icon that can be, it's optional, but then it also has an optional sound. It's timed and will go away on its own, but you can also tap to dismiss it early. And at the end of a scenario, once you've made it through all the branches and are clicking on a terminal answer, we can launch another story sequence. In this case, this is just an outro that doesn't really have anything, but another feature of it is that we can long press in order to skip sequences we've seen before. Those are the features for the iOS. The new iOS features that I added to PowerUp. You saw animate being used in both of the examples. All of the animations are being rendered using the animate class. In the second phase, I worked on the PowerUp Story Sequence Designer. What I wanted to do was to have a more convenient way for people other than programmers to actually script out and create these story sequences to be used throughout the app. A story sequence normally looks something like this. So the data set is essentially just a series of steps that have a left event and a right event, and at each event you give it a text, an image, a position, and an animation. But managing this, even though it's pretty straightforward as far as a data model goes, it can be difficult if you're trying to sync up which character and which type of character to use, and to make sure that you're moving positions properly. So I wanted to make sure that there was a better way to do that, and this graphical editor is what I came up with. Some of the features are that it can you manage multiple save states, which lets you keep different versions, and also use that to manage the different sets of sequences. So you have an intro and an outro for every scenario. And then when you're done, you can export all of the chosen scenario and scenario types into a single JSON that can just be dropped into the PowerUp project here. So the story sequence designer uses these cards to represent each step. Whenever you click on a card, you can then start editing text. We have to keep the list of images in sync with each other between this app and the actual PowerUp app repo in order to make sure that we're using the same media. You notice the cards update in real time. You can add an animation, but currently it doesn't give any feedback about the animation. That's a future issue we'd like to deal with. But this animation would render once it's being rendered in PowerUp. So I'm going to go and add a new card. Notice the image stays the same. That's no change. So the default is that the images will just stay and not move, and we can make it something else if we want to. Pick one that's a little bit more dramatic. Smiling. Move the position, give a different animation. Right, in this next slide, I'm going to go ahead and hide that image and add in a right side image with a different character. So the thumbnails at the top match with the card tracked down here, and it's just for convenience. If I click on one, it'll let me go to that thumbnail. That way I can quickly find, when I have multiple thumbnails, I can quickly find the cards that I want. You can edit them, and after the fact, you can delete and add cards. Deleting is a matter of just highlighting it and hitting your delete key. It also has a timeline, a time travel function, I'm sorry. So Control Z will undo, or I can use my undo redo. Once I have a scenario designed and created here, in this case, it's the home intro with some music, I can go to the Save menu, select a slot, and save a new slot. Now, if I were to undo all of this and go back here, so I have just this one card now, I can select it and load, and I'll return back to my same save state. It restores the exact state, so all of my undo history is available to me. The idea here is that you would use these save states in order to keep multiple scenarios. So I would have, say, the home outro and the library intro and the school intro, all of them. And then I would go to the export page. And this is where I'll select the actual scenario versions that I want to use for export. So in this case, I'll just have the home intro test. And I click export, and it's going to download a story sequences.json. I would normally, of course, want to fill out all of the available story sequences that were necessary. In this case, though, it's okay to leave them out. It would just ignore it in the data set. Before I show how you import this into PowerUp, the other feature of this is being able to save your work session. Because if I were to reload the app, there's no persistence. It's just in your web browser. So what we can do is download download a separate file. This is also a JSON, but it's not to be used with PowerUp. This one is just to use with this particular app. So if I go to here and choose that upload, I'm going to go to my downloads folder and find work session. When I restore, it'll restore the state of the app, including save states. Okay, so the next thing is to go ahead and add this to PowerUp. I'm going to archive this one and go ahead and grab the one I just downloaded. So story sequences.json and stick it in there. So this is just the single event that that we just added, just created in the app. And I'm going to run it again. Now when we launch it, you can see the new story sequence. This is the text that was included. It did the shake animation. It moved and did the tilt animation, and then the right side. And those were the only 3 slides, so we're done. But nothing else has changed. Adding them in is meant to be as painless as possible here. You do have to be careful that you make sure that these are properly labeled. So for example, if I had labeled this school, even if I had put it in this slot, it would only open as the school intro. So that's one of the caveats here. I'll talk about some future plans on what I'm thinking could be done about that in a little bit. But before that, I have another demo I'd like to show you. The PowerUp Scenario Builder is another web app. It is an interactive map that lets you export question and answer tables that can be used in the PowerUp database in order to create the actual scenario question and answers. Some features: it automatically handles unique IDs and relational values necessary to create the links in the database, and it also contains some convenience logic that helps avoid undesirable maps like infinite loops or answers and questions that link in inappropriate ways, such as an answer going to a question that may not make sense if you did a manual link. You can also export the SVG and PDF, the map as SVG and PDF, and this is just a convenience thing as well. So you could share it with someone rather than having them have to deal with uploading a JSON and viewing it in the actual app. So the scenario builder uses these nodes. Each node represents either a question or an answer. The first thing you want to do is go ahead and set the scenario ID. In this case, 5 represents the home scenario. Then when I add the first answer, you'll notice that the question IDs update. Right now it's giving a unique namespace just by multiplying the ID by 1,000, so that when we copy these into the question and answer tables, there'll be room for making edits. The new answer card is given a unique ID and is given a proper link to the question that will connect to it. I can add any number of answers to a question, and then I can have these answers present a new question, and each of these will be numbered in turn. In order to change the question text, you just double-click at the top and edit it. This was now the question description. Any non-italicized text can be edited. Most of it is okay to just let it be automatically handled, but points will default to 2. They'll need to be edited if you'd like for a particular answer to give more or less points, and you'll have to manually add in a pop-up ID if you'd like for it to launch a pop-up. After you've created a map, there's a number of things you can do using the menu down here. So the first is simply a layout. As things get more difficult and more more busy, I guess, more busy, then the Do Layout button, it can become really useful for lining things up. For example, I can disconnect and reconnect things, and if I were to do that over a series of questions and answers, then the Do Layout button will help us to clean up and identify things that may be problematic, like unconnected questions and answers. So the ultimate goal of this app is to take these data sets and to export them as tables that can be used in PowerUp, the existing PowerUp database. So if I click Export Answers and Export Questions, you'll see that they export as CSV files. The Android repo was using CSV files as their data sets, but the PowerUp repo is using a SQLite database right now, so we'll have to import these and copy them in a second. But before we do that, the other options you have here are a save and open JSON, which work just like the PowerUp story sequence work sessions. If I save that JSON, PowerUp map.json, I can reload this app and open PowerUp map.json to restore my work session with all of my questions and answers. Save state feature similar to the story sequence designer. Then I can also export the SVG or the PDF. These are just static images of the map as it exists right then and there. Like I said, this is so I can send this to an editor who can review and provide feedback without having to worry about loading things into the builder. Okay, so in order to actually get this data into PowerUp, we have to, in the iOS side, we have to import it into our SQLite database. This isn't ideal. I'd like to see a better solution in the future, but right now, since we are using the SQLite database, this is the method that we have available to us. So as you can see here, I'm using a graphical browser and editor in order to manage this. What I can do with this app is import a new table directly from the CSV file that I exported out of my app. So here's questions, CSV. It's going to create the table, and it's now imported. But I need to get these copied into my my actual questions table. So I'm just going to go ahead and copy them in order to be quick. So it's not going to have everything since I don't have enough fields yet, but you can see the new questions were added in here. And then if I do similar import table, import the answers. Now, since I unconnected and reconnected some of these things, we may not actually get all of these answers unless I go back and fix the question table. But I can go ahead and add in the ones that I have and show you that it gets imported into PowerUp. So if I write these changes and come back over here, I'll have to go ahead and reset PowerUp in order to make sure we're using the new database. But once we rebuild it, we'll skip this. And you can see that we have the question and answers that we just created here are now in our app here. What I was saying about we might not get the full set of questions and answers because I didn't actually make room for all of the questions. These answers may not link up when I click on them. So some of them do and some of them don't. But if we were to pay more attention to that and actually make sure that the full data set got copied over, then it would work just like it did here. Okay. Um, in the final phase, I worked on cleaning up all of these apps and creating public documentation. I wanted to make sure that the steps for uh, recreating demos, such as what I just did, were available to anyone. Um, most of the documentation can be reached through this link, the GSoC project documentation. All of the other links are in here. So, for example, the Story Sequence Player API docs. There's documentation on the Story Sequence Player class generated by Jazzy from Realms, and it's here so that future developers will be able to better decipher what's going on in the classes. You can see them here for all of the iOS Swift classes. Also, there are user documentation pages for the web apps. So each of the web apps has its own documentation with a link to the live app, and then instructions on how all of the features work, as well as a few technical, um, as well as some technical information in order to help future developers that may be working on the apps or working with the apps. As far as future development goes, the first step is to port the iOS features to Android. Um, this is something we haven't been working on, but we'll need to port back and forth the new features added to Android and vice versa. As far as the web apps go, I would really like to see a shared data and collaborative workspace. So, for example, I think that it would be beneficial instead of having these story sequences and this be local and having to save your work session as a local JSON and upload that maybe to source control or share it or email it to someone. To use a database, a cloud storage solution in order to make a collaborative uh, um, list of saved states available to anyone, as well as to be able to use logins in order to keep your own work sessions stored in the cloud. And on top of that, I think that the two web apps could be used, could use the same shared cloud space in order to know about each other, so that this app here, whenever I create a saved state, uh, then in the scenario builder, it would there would be a way of knowing that the next QID would have to be set to, instead of having to manually set it to the right value, then I would be able to set it through a drop-down list or something that's drawn from the save states available here. I'd also like to see the ability to import these data sets into PowerUp streamlined, perhaps by having PowerUp draw that when it's built, draw the data set in from the cloud storage, or to have a better solution for automatically deploying the data sets to both repositories, Android and iOS. Another thing that is kind of on a back burner, but scripting more animation options with Animate. I added a few examples in the story sequences, but I had created Animate in order to make it easier to add to that library over time. As far as the challenges and the things that I've learned, they kind of go hand in hand here. Um, my I did not have a great track record for attention to code quality. Coming from the background that I had, a lot of the time I was free to do kind of brute force tactics and just do whatever was the fastest, most obvious way to get something to work. And it often left my code unreadable, even to me after maybe a month of not looking at it. It was also hardly ever documented, and quite often very inefficient because of the way I was coding. Um, the things I was making weren't necessarily meant to have a long lifespan, since they were often for a performance or for an art installation of some sort. Production schedule versus the perfectionist. I have a tendency to get caught up in trying to iterate until something is exactly the way I think it should be. And one of the things that I've had to do is cut myself off and say, at this point, this feature is good enough. It's doing what it needs to do in order for it to move forward. So let's leave it alone. That actually is kind of difficult for me. It takes a bit of a shift in my thinking, and I have to really pay attention to that. Otherwise, I get caught up spending hours that I don't need to be spending working on stuff that doesn't need to be worked on. Um, Reasonable Git practices. Again, because I normally worked on projects by myself, I was pretty used to just committing over and over simple things that were not very well described or commented to a single master branch. And I never really had to worry about what other people thought of it. It was mostly just for my own sake and make sure that I didn't lose something that was important. This project and working with Jenny and on the PowerUp iOS repo has given me an opportunity to put into practice things I knew I should have been doing, but just wasn't. And dealing with proper comments and pull requests and isolating things so that other people can see what code was committed for what reasons. Team accountability, that kind of goes hand in hand with the other stuff above. Uh, I've worked on small teams before, but normally we were pretty isolated in that we'd be responsible for providing our own little section of a project. We didn't really review each other's code or have to even read each other's code. So having to report to a team for feedback and to be able to demonstrate what was going on, and then to be able to respond to the feedback and actually make changes has been a change in pace from the way I would have worked before. So that was really valuable to me. And then something that most web developers know, but I feel that needs to be reiterated over and over, is that cross-browser development isn't a great experience. Again, normally when I'm working on my own, I would just focus on Chrome and just leave other browsers to their whatever their fates may be. In this case, I was trying to support the three major browsers, Chrome and Firefox and Safari. And we've come reasonably close. There are some quirks, but it was definitely something that I had to spend a lot of time on that I wouldn't have done on past projects. All of these things were challenges for me, but they were also something that I think I have improved greatly on. In fact, I'm just looking at projects that I've worked on in the past versus the web apps here and even the Swift code. The code quality is very different. I feel confident that I would be able to return to the code and be able to decipher what's going on. And that's because I know that I paid attention to that when I was actually designing the structures and in writing the code. As far as personal outcomes, I've kind of covered it. I wrote a Medium article that puts a little more detail into this, but this quote from the article kind of summarizes what I just described and what I feel is the big outcome for me. Just having to be disciplined and to make sure that I wasn't getting caught up on things that were not important. So definitely working on time management, but also on code quality. It was something that definitely required me to think a little different about the way I am developing than I would normally or have had in the past. That's it. Thank you for being here and for listening. If you have any questions, I will do my best to answer.
Hey, Katie. I had a question about what had initially inspired you to, I don't know, I guess create products that were going to help us streamline that kind of process of the scenarios and the sequences.
Well, it started when I got around to trying to, well, it started when I was planning on my initial proposal, which was to add to the scenarios and kind of create placeholders for the intros. I was going to do it manually and just hard code the data sets in and then uh, have documentation saying, change these up this way, paste in your text here, that kind of thing. But then I started looking at the actual data sets that were already in PowerUp, and I realized that uh, even though the state of it was something that was actively being worked on, just the process of trying to decipher or trying to map out where questions and answers went and what they were supposed to do and what were the different branches, potential branches in the app, was becoming really overwhelming for me. And I thought about it a little bit, and I thought, if it's overwhelming for me, it would probably be overwhelming for other people. So I had created a visualizer for just myself, and that's where the inspiration for the first web app came from, the scenario builder. Originally, it was just mapping out what was already in the database. It wasn't editable. And once I decided to turn it into the editor, and after presenting it to the rest of the team and getting positive feedback, it kind of inspired me to think about that a little bit more and how else uh, something like this could be used. And since I was already creating these story sequences, I thought that the obvious next step was to do something similar for these. Um, and again, I presented a mock-up and uh, I guess a kind of, I would like to do this document, and got some positive feedback and was able to change my timeline and move forward with it. But I, I, I felt that the actual process of creating a robust and immersive and well-written story was going to be hindered if um, if we were either just writing it out as lists of questions and answers or even drawing static documents either in a graphics editor or even by hand. I felt that it was prone to errors and could lead to either really simple maps or could lead to maps that would not necessarily make a whole lot of sense. So I guess I was looking at it also from the perspective that uh, a, a contributor who might be a knowledgeable person about the content of the scenario or who is a writer or an editor, but may not be tech oriented or a programmer, that these kinds of tools would then allow them to have a more significant hand significant hand in actually contributing to the project, which probably would be a better case to have uh, uh, an accomplished writer writing scenarios rather than have someone like me making placeholder things. I hope that got to the point. It was a little long-winded answer.
Yes, thank you. Do you have any more questions? Okay, thank you to all those who were watching or will watch this later.